January 23, 1960. 10:56 a.m. Two men are sitting inside a steel sphere the size of a small car, suspended 10,916 meters below the surface of the Pacific Ocean. The pressure outside is crushing, over 1,000 times the atmospheric pressure at sea level. It's enough force to compress their vessel by several centimeters, enough to implode a submarine like a tin can. They are deeper than any human has ever been, deeper than Mount Everest is tall, so deep that if you dropped a stone from the surface, it would take over an hour to reach them. Where they are is known as Challenger Deep, the deepest known point on Earth, and the bottom of the Mariana Trench. The two men, Lieutenant Don Walsh and Jacques Picard, peer through the tiny porthole of their deep-sea submersible, expecting to see nothing, because for decades scientists believed that life could not exist at these depths. The pressure would crush cells, the cold would halt all biological processes, and darkness would make survival impossible. But as their lights illuminate the seafloor, something moves. A pale creature that looks like a flatfish glides across the sediment, untroubled by the weight of an entire ocean pressing down on it. That was the moment humanity realized the deep ocean was not a dead zone. It was rather an alien world filled with organisms we were never supposed to find. And in the decades since, every expedition to the abyss has revealed something more disturbing, more impossible, and more tragic than the last. Let's talk discovery. The Mariana Trench was discovered in 1875 by the HMS Challenger, a British Royal Navy vessel conducting the first global oceanographic survey. Using weighted ropes, the crew measured a depth of 8,184 meters near the Mariana Islands, far deeper than anyone had imagined the ocean could be. They named the deepest section Challenger Deep, though they had no way of knowing its true depth or what lay at the bottom. It would take another 85 years before humans reached it, and only 3 manned expeditions have ever succeeded. But before we dive into these expeditions, there are layers of ocean that lie above the Mariana Trench that we need to talk about. First on the scale is the sunlight zone, which extends from 0 to 200 meters deep into the ocean. In this zone, light penetrates, photosynthesis occurs, life is abundant, and familiar with fish, dolphins, jellyfish, and coral reefs. This is the ocean we know, but below 200 meters, light begins to fail. That means we've entered the twilight zone, which runs deep from 200 to 1,000 meters. Here, sunlight fades to a dim blue glow, and most creatures have to produce their own light using chemical reactions to create cold biological fire. It is a world of illusions, where predators can lure prey with glowing appendages and prey can camouflage themselves by matching the faint light from above. Then you go deeper into the midnight zone, which runs from 1,000 to 4,000 meters deep. Darkness is absolute here. The water temperature drops to near freezing, pressure mounts, and food is scarce, drifting down from the surface as marine snow. The creatures in the midnight zone are also alien with translucent bodies, enormous eyes designed to detect the faintest bioluminescent flash, and jaws that unhinge to swallow prey larger than themselves. Then we have the abyss, 4,000 to 6,000 meters deep. Here life is sparse, and the pressure is 400 times greater than at the surface. There are no plants, no photosynthesis, and the food web is sustained entirely by carrion and chemosynthetic bacteria that convert chemicals from hydrothermal vents into energy. Finally, the Hadal zone, which is 6,000 plus meters deep. This is the realm of the trenches, where only 2% of the ocean lies, confined to a handful of deep fissures scattered across the globe. The Mariana Trench in particular plunges to 10,984 meters, which is nearly 11 kilometers below the surface. How life persists even there. Now let's take a look at the stories of humanity's discoveries in the deepest place on Earth. First on the list is the Trieste in 1960. The dive by Lieutenant Don Walsh and Jacques Picard took nearly 5 hours to reach the bottom. Their vessel, the Trieste, was a deep-diving submersible with a spherical pressure chamber suspended beneath a gasoline-filled float. While at the bottom, they spent only 20 minutes because their porthole had cracked from the pressure, and they feared staying longer would be fatal. But in those 20 minutes, they saw life. Flatfish, shrimp-like amphipods, and evidence of biological activity. Of course, their discovery shocked the scientific world, because it meant that if life existed at the deepest point on Earth, it could exist anywhere. 50-ish years later, filmmaker and explorer James Cameron descended to Challenger Deep in the Deep-Sea Challenger, a vertical submersible designed to withstand the extreme pressure. He spent 3 hours on the seafloor collecting samples and filming in high definition. What he found was a barren, desolate landscape, fine sediment stretching in every direction, punctuated by small rocks and bacterial mats. But there was also life, tiny amphipods, translucent sea cucumbers, organisms no larger than a fingernail, living in perpetual darkness under crushing weight. Cameron described it as lunar, desolate, and foreboding. Then in 2019, explorer Victor Vescovo completed the deepest dive in history, reaching 10,928 meters, slightly deeper than Cameron. He made multiple dives, mapping the trench floor with unprecedented detail and collecting biological samples. Subsequent expeditions have revealed more species, more adaptations, and more questions. But they also revealed something else: pollution. Basically, the organisms living in the Hadal Zone are natives of a hostile environment, shaped by millions of years of evolution into forms that cannot exist anywhere else. However, for all the deep ocean is worth, the organisms living in it are not just biological curiosities for humanity to study. They are apparently pharmaceutical gold mines. For example, bacteria living in the Hadal Zone produce enzymes that remain functional under extreme pressure and temperature. In 2019, scientists analyzing amphipods collected from Challenger Deep made a disturbing discovery. The creatures contained microplastics and persistent organic pollutants like industrial chemicals banned decades ago, but still circulating at the deepest point on Earth. Plastic debris has been found throughout the Mariana Trench, ranging from discarded fishing nets to plastic bags, bottles, or a piece of garbage drifting down through 11 kilometers of water. We have reached everywhere. We have contaminated everything, and we need to make necessary changes before our woes come back to hurt us, because ocean trenches are not isolated features. They actually are connected to the global climate system in ways we are only beginning to understand. Trenches act as carbon sinks, trapping organic material that sinks from the surface and burying it in sediment that will remain locked away for millions of years. This process removes carbon from the atmosphere, slowing climate change. They also play a role in thermohaline circulation, which is the global conveyor belt of ocean currents driven by temperature and salinity differences. Trenches are sites where cold, dense water sinks, driving circulation that regulates global temperatures and weather patterns. But we do not yet know how much carbon trenches store. We do not yet know how pollution affects their ecosystems. We do not even know if warming oceans will alter the circulation they drive, which is why we must be careful, because we are only conducting an uncontrolled experiment on systems we do not understand, in places we cannot easily observe, with consequences we cannot predict. Fewer than 30 people have visited Challenger Deep. By comparison, over 600 have been to space. We know almost nothing about the deepest parts of our planet. But we know enough to understand this. Life exists in places we assumed were sterile. Organisms thrive under conditions we thought were impossible. The deep ocean is not empty. It is full of adaptations, solutions, and biochemistry we are only beginning to decode. And it is our responsibility to care for it along the way. If you want to learn more about the hidden worlds beneath the surface and some of Earth's fragile ecosystems, subscribe and join us as we take you into the places where science meets the unknown.